You know that specific kind of deja vu you get when you're driving through a city.
Oh, yeah, like when you're on a road trip or visiting somewhere new.
Exactly. You're downtown,
Hmm.
and it's this canyon of glass and steel, banks, tech headquarters, people in suits rushing
Like a
around.
really energetic, highly expensive core.
Right. But then you drive, say, 10 minutes out, and the scene just cuts.
Yeah.
Suddenly, it's gritty warehouses,
Yeah.
maybe an old factory with a rusted fence, a lot of cracked concrete.
And then you keep driving.
You keep driving, and the houses get small and tight, and then suddenly, boom.
You're in a sprawling suburb.
Right. Massive lawns, winding cul-de-sacs.
And finally, that endless ring of strip malls on the edge of town.
It feels scripted, like someone opened a city-building simulation game and just clicked copy and paste over and over.
It really does.
It makes you wonder, is there a rule book everyone is following? Like, why are the car dealerships always huddled together like penguins?
That's a great question.
And why does the rent drop the second you cross one specific street? Or why do American cities look like donuts while European or Latin American cities they just feel completely different?
Well, the short answer is that it isn't random. None of it is.
And that is our mission for this deep dive. We are unpacking some fascinating source material today. It's a look at the internal structure and evolution of global urban models.
Which is a concept straight out of AP Human Geography.
Now, I know that title sounds like the driest lecture imaginable.
Huh.
I almost fell asleep just reading the header on the notes.
It definitely has that dense textbook ring to it.
But as we went through these sources, it became really clear that this is actually about decoding the DNA of our daily lives.
Yes.
These aren't just maps we're looking at. They're battle plans.
That is a very fair description. We're looking at models, basically theoretical frameworks that urban planners and geographers use to track how money, history, and technology fight for space.
So we're going to try to crack the code for you today. We're going to look at why Chicago looks different from Mexico City.
And why Jakarta operates completely differently than Detroit.
Exactly. But to do that, I feel like we have to start with the invisible hand. The engine under the hood.
We do. Before we get to the actual shapes, the circles and wedges on the map, we have to understand the economic law that dictates them.
Right.
It's called bid-rent theory.
Bid rent. It sounds highly technical, but in the notes, it seemed to hinge on a pretty basic concept.
It does.
It's basically asking, how much are you willing to pay to be the center of attention?
In a nutshell, yes. The theory posits a very simple rule. Land value is highest at the center, the central business district, or the CBD.
Because that is the point of maximum accessibility.
Exactly. Everyone wants to be there. High demand means high prices.
This is why a simple turkey sandwich downtown costs $20, but 5 miles out it costs $8.
Yeah, that sandwich shop has to pay the downtown landlord. As you move away from the center, the price of the land drops. Geographers call this distance decay.
I've tried to think of a good analogy for this while reading the material. Tell me if this tracks. It's like a stadium concert.
Oh, okay. How so?
Well, the CBD is the front row, or the pit, right by the stage. You're squished in, you have zero personal space, it's loud, it's chaotic.
Well, you are right there.
Exactly. You pay a massive premium for that access. That's your skyscrapers and your major banks. They need to be seen.
Okay, I like that. So what are the suburbs in this concert analogy?
The suburbs are the nosebleed seats, or the lawn section in the back. The tickets are super cheap.
Right.
You have room to spread out a blanket, maybe do a cartwheel if you want, but you need binoculars to see the stage.
That is surprisingly accurate, and that trade-off dictates the entire layout of a city.
How so?
Well, commerce needs that front row access, so they pay the high rent. Residential zones, everyday people usually value space over access, so they get pushed to the cheaper lawn seats on the periphery.
So the shape of a city is really just a graph of who can afford which ticket.
Historically, yes. But here is where it starts to get messy. Technology keeps changing the rules of the venue.
Which brings us to the North American models. This was the bulk of our first set of notes, and it really reads like a timeline of American transportation.
It absolutely is. We start back in the 1920s. Chicago. The Jazz Age. This gives us our first framework, the Burgess concentric zone model.
Ernest Burgess looks at Chicago, and he basically sees a bullseye.
A target, yes. He argues that cities grow outward from the core in uniform rings. Zone 1 is the bullseye.
The central business district.
Right. Then you have Zone 2, the zone of transition.
This part stood out to me in the sources because the description was pretty grim.
It was very grim. Remember, this is the era of heavy industry. Zone 2 surrounds the downtown. It's filled with factories, but it's also the housing for the people who work in those factories.
Mostly immigrants and new arrivals, right?
Yes, packed into dense tenements. Because this is before the widespread adoption of the car for the working class.
So you had to physically walk to the factory.
Exactly. So, applying our bid rent theory here, why were the poorest people living on relatively expensive land right next to the center?
Because they couldn't afford the transportation part of the equation.
Bang on. They traded space for proximity. They packed 10 people into a single room just to afford the rent because they had to be within walking distance to work.
Wow. Okay, then you move out to Zone 3, which is working class homes.
Yeah.
Then Zone 4, the middle class. And finally, the outer ring, Zone 5,
The commuter zone.
which means the wealthy suburbs.
Yes.
So in this 1920s model, the rich people are on the outside.
Because they could afford the train ticket into the city. They essentially bought distance from the dirt and the noise. But there is a pretty big flaw in Burgess's thinking.
Besides the fact that Chicago isn't a perfect circle because a giant lake is in the way.
Well, right, that too. He assumed a totally flat, featureless plain. He didn't count for geography or the fact that cities just aren't perfect blobs.
Which brings us to the 1930s. Cars are starting to arrive, but rail is still the absolute kingmaker. Enter Homer Hoyt and his sector model.
Hoyt looks at the bullseye idea and says, no, cities don't grow in uniform rings, they grow in wedges.
Wedges, like a pie chart.
Think about how a city actually expands in the real world. It follows the roads and the rail lines. It stretches out along those paths.
Okay, so if there's a major train line going north, the city stretches north along it.
Precisely. And Hoyt introduced a really crucial social element here. He noticed that the wealthy don't just live uniformly on the outside, they live along the pretty routes.
The pretty roads.
High grounds, waterfronts, scenic boulevards that were intentionally built far away from the smoke of the factories. The wealthy sector extends from the CBD out to the edge of the city like a specific slice of pie.
And on the flip side of that, the factories and heavy industry follow the heavy rail lines, the ugly routes.
And low-income housing gets wedged in right next to that industry.
So bid rent is still happening. But now the value of the land isn't just about raw distance from the center.
Right.
It's about what's nearby. The rich pay for the nice view and the clean breeze, and the poor get stuck with the industrial soot.
Exactly. It's essentially design segregation based on land use and transit. But then World War II ends, the economy explodes, and the personal automobile takes over completely.
1945. Harrison Ullman. The multiple nuclei model.
This is the death of the single bullseye. Harrison Ullman argued that cities don't just have one heart anymore.
Right, because if I live in a massive modern city, I don't go all the way downtown for everything.
Exactly. Cities start to develop multiple nodes, or nuclei. A massive university becomes a node, an airport becomes its own node, a huge medical center.
And this introduces that term I struggled with a bit in the notes. Economic agglomeration.
It's just a fancy academic way of saying birds of a feather flock together.
This explains the car dealership thing I asked about at the start of the deep dive.
Right. If you are selling cars, you want to be exactly where people are already looking for cars. So you
Yeah.
cluster together. You see the same thing with tech companies in Silicon Valley or art galleries in specific districts.
But the sources say there's a flip side to this clustering. Negative externalities.
Yes, the not in my backyard effect. Heavy industry naturally repels high-class housing. You are never going to find a multi-million-dollar mansion right next to a smelting plant.
Right.
So the city becomes this complex patchwork quilt. It gets really messy. The tidy little rings are gone forever.
And that messiness just keeps spreading outward until we hit the modern era, the galactic city model.
Also known as the peripheral model. And this is the lived reality for most of our North American listeners.
This is the ring road, the Beltway.
Think of Atlanta and Interstate 285, or Washington, D.C. and the Capitol Beltway. The city has completely decentralized. The old downtown CBD is often just a historic artifact for tourists or government offices.
Because the real action is happening out on the highway loop.
Ex-
The source material talks extensively about edge cities, and they make it clear these aren't just bedroom suburbs anymore.
No, they are fully functional, independent cities. They have massive office parks, mega malls, hotels, entertainment districts. You can live in an edge city, work there, and die there without ever stepping foot in the actual historic downtown.
It's the ultimate victory of the car. We just bypass the center entirely.
We did. But, and this is a really big, but that is strictly the North American story.
Right. And the sources warn us not to fall into the trap of thinking everywhere operates like Detroit or Dallas.
If you try to apply the galactic model to a place like Rio de Janeiro or Jakarta, you're going to be completely lost. Nothing will make sense.
So let's pivot. The text calls this section "Context is King." We have to look at how colonial history and very different economic pressures completely warp the map in other parts of the world.
Let's start with the Latin American city model. This is a fascinating inversion of the American system we just talked about.
In the U.S., as we just established, money buys you space out in the suburbs. The inner city was traditionally where poverty was concentrated.
But in Latin America, it's often the exact opposite. The model is based largely on the laws of the Indies.
Those are the rules set down by the Spanish colonizers, right?
Yes. They legally mandated a central plaza surrounded by the church and the main government buildings.
So the absolute center is the most prestigious part of town.
It is. But there's a very specific architectural feature here called the spine.
The commercial spine.
Imagine a grand, beautifully paved boulevard extending outward from that central plaza. It's lined with high-end shops, theaters, and the city's best infrastructure.
And the wealthy people live right along this spine.
Exactly. It creates this very distinct wedge of elite residential zones right in the middle. But here is the stark contrast.
Okay.
In the U.S., the further out you drive, the richer and more spacious it gets.
Yeah.
In the Latin American model, as you move away from that central spine, the quality of life drops off a cliff.
The notes refer to these outer edges as disamenity zones.
That's the academic term. On the ground, we're talking about favelas, barrios, squatter settlements.
The sources describe these as areas where the city essentially stops functioning. There are no paved roads, no regular running water, no police presence.
And this is where we have to reapply that bid-rent theory. We have to ask, why do the rich stay right in the center?
Well, I assume it's because in a developing economy, the concert ticket you're buying isn't just about geographic location, it's about access to infrastructure.
Hang on.
Yeah.
Water lines, reliable power grids, sewage systems, they are incredibly expensive to build and maintain. In the U.S., we had the sheer wealth to run those pipes 50 miles out into the suburbs.
But in many developing nations, that infrastructure is trapped in the center. It never made it out.
It's a survival mechanism. The rich cling to the center where the pipes and the power actually work.
So the poor are pushed to the outer edge where the pipes haven't reached yet.
Yes. The map directly reflects the scarcity of resources.
That is a fundamental reversal of the whole drive to the suburbs for a better life mentality.
Completely inverted.
Okay, let's fly over to Southeast Asia. The Southeast Asian city model. Now this one threw me for a loop because the notes explicitly state there is no central business district.
Not in the traditional Western sense, no. You have to remember the history here. Many of these major cities, think Jakarta, Manila, Ho Chi Minh City, they grew rapidly under colonial rule.
And the colonizers really only cared about one thing: exporting goods.
Right. So the focal point of the city isn't a downtown bank or a plaza, it's the port zone. The entire orientation of the city is looking out toward the water.
So instead of a bullseye, it's more like a fan opening up away from the harbor.
Visualizing a fan is a really good way to think about it. You have this massive port, and then the Western Commercial Zone is right next to it.
Because they ran the ships.
Exactly. The government buildings are right there, too. And you also have what the model calls the Alien Commercial Zone.
Historically, that was often Chinese merchants, right?
Yes. And they are all clustered tightly nearby. Everything hugs the port.
Because that's where the literal money enters and leaves the country.
Correct. But there's also a feature in this model I hadn't really thought about before. Market gardening.
Yeah, this was really interesting to read about. On the outskirts of these cities, you don't just have endless residential suburbs. You have this distinct zone of mixed land use.
Light agriculture, intense gardening right on the edge of the metropolis.
Which totally makes sense when you think about it. If you don't have massive refrigerated trucking networks like we do in the U.S., you need your fresh food source to be within walking distance or a very short drive from the local market.
Again, it's the lack of cold chain technology dictating the actual shape of the city.
It's a functional necessity baked right into the map.
Exactly.
All right, let's look at our final stop. And honestly, this might be the most complex one in the entire deep dive. The Sub-Saharan African city model.
This one is incredibly complex because you're seeing multiple eras of history stacked right on top of each other, literally.
The source material calls it the triple CBD.
It sounds chaotic, and if you walk through it, it often feels chaotic. Instead of one unified downtown, you basically have 3 different ones functioning simultaneously.
Let's break those down. What does that actually look like on the ground?
First, you have the colonial CBD. This is the rigid grid system left behind by the Europeans. Very vertical buildings, administration, international banks.
So if you squint, it just looks like a standard Western city.
Men in suits, paved roads, traffic lights, yes.
Okay, that's layer one.
Then you turn a corner and you immediately hit the traditional market. This is usually open air, sprawling, single story. It's incredibly vibrant, loud, and heavily focused on cash transactions and informal trade.
That's where the local population actually goes to shop for their daily goods.
Exactly.
And the third.
The third is the modernizing CBD. This is sort of a transitional zone, usually right on the curb of the colonial city. It features simpler architecture and it's full of local commerce that's actively trying to break into the formal global market.
So if you're living in this city, you might literally have to visit all three in a single afternoon, depending on what you need to get done.
You might. And the residential areas surrounding these three centers are highly segregated, often divided by ethnic identity or tribal affiliation.
Which the notes mention is another lingering legacy of colonial divide and rule strategies.
Sadly, yes.
And what about the periphery? Is it more like the U.S. suburbs or more like the Latin American barrios?
Much closer to Latin America. Vast shanty towns. Rapid urbanization means people are pouring into the city from the countryside way faster than formal housing can be built.
So they just settle on the absolute edges, often in highly unstable environments.
Yes.
It's heavy. We've gone from the neat, tidy bullseye of 1920 Chicago to this incredibly complex, throbbing triple CBD in Africa.
It is a lot to take in at once, but I think if you take a step back and look at the whole picture, there is a unified theory operating here.
Bring it back home for us.
Yeah.
What is the single thread connecting Chicago to Nairobi?
It all comes back to that concert tickets analogy we started with. Bid rent.
Who gets the best seats?
Right. But the definition of best depends entirely on the context. In North America, we got wealthy enough and we built enough roads that best suddenly meant far away from the noise.
Right. Technology, specifically the personal car, allowed us to completely invert the model. We paid a premium to leave the center.
But in the global south?
In the global south, best means access.
Access to clean water, to reliable power, to basic safety, those things are scarce. So the rich hug the center or they hug the spine. They basically build a fortress around the working infrastructure.
So the map isn't just about geography or terrain. It's a physical manifestation of what a society values and what it lacks.
Precisely. If you follow the money or if you follow the water pipes, you will find the model.
I want to try a little active experiment with you, the listener, right now. If you're listening to this in your car, or maybe you're out walking your dog, just look around.
Where are you in the model?
Are you in a zone of transition? Are you driving past a row of old brick warehouses that are being turned into hyper-expensive lofts?
Because that's gentrification reclaiming that inner ring.
Or are you out in an edge city? Are you surrounded by gleaming glass office parks and chain restaurants sitting literally miles from the old downtown?
Once you have the vocabulary for this stuff sector model, disamenity zone, agglomeration, you really can't unsee it.
It's like putting on X-ray glasses.
That is the true power of these models. They reveal the invisible forces, colonialism, early rail lines, raw rent prices that decided exactly why your house is located where it is.
But before we wrap up, we have to touch on the one thing that might completely break all of these historical models. The source material dropped a fascinating little breadcrumb at the very end.
Ah, yes. About the internet.
The great disruptor.
We talked about the galactic model, those edge cities relying on heavy highways.
Right.
But if I can just work from my laptop, I don't need the highway at all.
If you can work for a major financial firm in London while sitting in a quiet cafe in Bali or a remote cabin in Montana, does the bid-rent theory even apply anymore?
Does the center even exist?
Right. If I don't need access to the stage, the whole stadium analogy falls apart.
We might be witnessing the very early birth of what geographers are starting to call the placeless urban model.
That sounds like straight science fiction.
Think about it. If the central business district is just a server in the cloud, why do we need to physically cluster together at all? We might start choosing where to live based purely on aesthetics or local community vibe, not economic access.
So the city stops being this giant machine for work and becomes, what? A pure lifestyle choice.
Maybe. Or maybe we just drift further and further apart, becoming totally disconnected from any physical community. If the town square is fully digital, do we just stop taking care of the physical one?
That is, wow. That is a slightly terrifying thought to leave on. a city with no center.
It's the next frontier of human geography, and we are living through it right now.
Well, on that note, thanks for helping us decode the map today. This was eye-opening.
Always a pleasure to be here.
And to you listening, keep watching the streets. You never know what invisible pattern you're walking through will catch you on the next deep dive.